Hello and welcome to another monthly installment of Lean Catalyst, Strategies and Tactics for the Transformational CEO. I am your host, Damon Baker, and I'm the CEO of Lean Focus. And in a minute, it'll be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But before we get into the topic at hand, a few housekeeping notes. All participants today will be placed in listen-only mode. At the end of today's webinar, there will be an opportunity for Q&A. We usually leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to answer your questions. You'll notice at the bottom of your Zoom webinar control panel, there is a Q&A icon. If you click that Q&A icon, you can type in your question, and I will moderate those questions on a first come, first served basis to today's guest. And we'll spend as much time getting through all of those questions as we can, if possible. If you're unable to watch this webinar live, a recording will be made and posted usually between 1 to 2 days after the interview completes, and will go on our YouTube page. And our YouTube channel is Lean Focus LLC. You can also go to our website, leanfocus.com, and navigate your way to the Thought Leadership page. And on the Thought Leadership page, you will find this interview as well as all interviews we've done in the past. And you can also sign up for additional webinars that we have planned in the future for further editions of Lean Catalyst. So it's my distinct honor to introduce today's guest, who's Greg Scaven. Good morning, Greg.
Hey, good morning, Damon. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks.
So Greg is the CEO of SWD, and we're going to get into what SWD does here in a minute. But Greg has over 25 years experience in applying lean principles across a variety of businesses with a proven record of improving customer experience, increasing employee retention, driving organic growth. His experience includes 2+ decades within the defense, space, and automotive industries, and has most recently served as the president of Pacific Scientific, which was a Danaher business, which then spun out into a Fortive operating company. Greg joined SWD after 16 years at both Fortive and Danaher, which was wholly owned subsidiary, as I mentioned, and he's held senior leadership positions at both Zodiac and Simula within the automotive industry as well. Greg has a BS in chemical engineering from Lehigh University and MS in chemical biochemical engineering from the University of Pennsylvania. And he is a veteran of the U.S. Army and has held the rank of major following 8 years of service. Thank you for your service, Greg. And it's, again, a pleasure to see you. And tell us a little bit about what SWD is and does.
All right, well, SWD is a third-generation family-owned business based here in my now hometown of Mesa, Arizona. And so I came here in August of 23 as the CEO to take over from the third-generation leader who was stepping out of day-to-day operations, and kind of to just embark on this journey of doing what we needed to do to establish ourselves as a market leader in the spray foam insulation market. So SWD is basically a manufacturer of polyurethane spray foam. And so our principal market is mostly residential homes. Most of our product is sold for residential homes. And so our competition is mostly fiberglass product. So if you think about just sort of transition from fiberglass product to polyurethane spray foams, the big advantage for spray foam is really one around air sealing. I don't need to get in the heat transfer mechanisms, even though I could do that anytime I wanted to. But generally speaking, when it just comes to insulating properties, air sealing is going to be really important. So if you kind of think about the concept of transforming your home into a ginormous Yeti cooler, that's basically what spray foam does. And so that's an area where it's an underlying growing market, and we're looking to see what we can do at SWD to participate in our outsized share growth of that marketplace.
And the channel for sale of your product is primarily done how?
So we're about 50-50. So we do about half of our business through distributors. We work with a series of mostly national distributors, but some regional distributors as well. And then we have some direct customers that we sell to. So if you think about insulation companies who specialize in either original installs as new home construction goes up, or for retrofit applications. If somebody's looking to do their home. I'm in the Phoenix area, so if you're looking to do your home in the Phoenix area, Banker Insulation is an example of a big local company that does a lot of insulating work. And Banker Insulation will obviously provide fiberglass, but if somebody's interested in spray foam, they also provide spray foam options, and SWD is one of the companies that supplies to Banker.
So I'm curious to sort of hear what your experience has been thus far in this type of manufacturing environment, because from your background, I think most of your background, I could be wrong here, has been mostly discrete manufacturing, whether it be automotive, aerospace, or defense in the case of PacSci. And now you go into a batch manufacturing, continuous manufacturing environment.
Right.
So that's one key difference. And there's a lot of nuances and I would say special circumstances and ways that lean need and should be applied in that environment, at least on the shop floor. There's a lot of overlapping similarity in the sort of the leadership structure and things like that, which we'll get into. But then on top of that, another difference is you're coming into a family-run environment, not a public markets type of environment like Fortive or Danaher. So how long have you been at SWD so far?
So it's been about 18 months.
Okay, so what's been the 18 months takeaways, learning so far, and how does this stuff apply in this world? And does, if at all, the family dynamic add any interesting wrinkle or spice to the challenge or the opportunity of applying a lean business system to this type of company?
Well, I mean, the real short answer is yes to all of that, right? There are a lot of differences. My background, like you described, I mean, really, I had spent 30 plus years working with pyrotechnics and explosives. And so, from a foam standpoint, obviously, it's a very different market. Our customers are very different. But the bottom line principles, right, if you think about applying lean, there's a lot of things that are same. And I think a lot of those things that are same is the philosophy of how things should be approached. But, batch manufacturing, like you might have at a company like PacSci EMC, was, very, kind of, you've got this sort of very high mix of product, very low volumes, relatively speaking, compared to even my automotive experience, which was also explosives and pyrotechnic based, but extremely high volume, where you might only make 4 main products, but you're making thousands of them every day. So, I think that cross section between sort of applying lean principles and then what we do here at SWD, we'll do that, tens of thousands of pounds of a batch any given day of a specific chemical formulation, right? Just understanding what a great practices look like. I mean, as we get into the discussions here later today, we can talk about the importance of safety and quality of everything we do. I mean, I think that's always paramount to any industry, making sure that you've got great consistency of product, great consistency of service, making sure that you're focused on listening to customers. Those things are not unique to any one business. They apply to all businesses. And, back to this question of ownership, whether you're a Fortune 500 business like Fortive and Danaher or a family-owned business, making sure that we pay attention to those things around just how do we drive a continuous improvement mindset are going to provide value to either types of those ownership groups.
Yeah, I've been in family-owned situations several times throughout my career, and rather than focus on what's different, I focus on what's the shared mutual purpose that
Right.
is both the public and in the private family-owned environment. And I can tell you from personal experience, because I also am part of a family-owned business, value creation is still number one. It's like, how do you drive top line? How do you drive profitable growth? How do you expand? All of those things are still highly relevant, if not the most important thing in a family-run environment. And honestly, like my experience has been, there seems to be more focus on the things that truly matter to the core business itself that need the business to move forward. And there's less of what I would describe as like all the extracurricular kinds of business priorities that can go on in a large Fortune 500 companies. Not to discount those things and say they aren't important. Almost out of necessity, a smaller family-run business can't devote calories to some of those other things because they just don't have the people, the bandwidth, and those kinds of things. And as a leader, I found that it sort of clears the clutter
Right.
from what we need to focus on, and your focus really is on growing and improving this business, which provides a lot of clarity. Have you experienced something similar, or is it been different?
No, I very, very much similar, right? I always thought of those, call them extracurricular kinds of stuff, right, as really good growth opportunities for our talent when I was at those other businesses. And maybe we don't get as much of those opportunities here in the family-owned business. We're kind of in the thick of the firefight every day, and you're just focused on those things. I would say one of the things that you miss is, being a part of a family-owned business is maybe that ability to benchmark. And I think benchmarking other businesses becomes so important. It was sort of fundamental in what we did as a part of a larger Fortune 500 organization. I would look at businesses. We were, I guess blessed would be the word I was used, but we were blessed when I was at EMC that we were the only aerospace and defense business. So it sort of forced this look of how you could apply some best practices in other businesses, and then kind of left to our leadership team to figure out what's the best way to apply that in our market space where it's really going to provide value for our customers. Here, without that opportunity to benchmark, sometimes I think our solution set has a tendency to be at times maybe a little bit too insular. And so I always try to remind myself, certainly not perfect, but remind myself, what are other opportunities where I can go benchmark how other people in my industry might be doing that? And so, if anything, this has been an opportunity for me to start to grow my own network beyond just people who are rocket scientists and are making pyrotechnics and explosives, to looking at the home construction market and trying to understand what can I learn from people who've been doing this for a really long time.
Absolutely. So I want to get into your lean journey. We do that quite often here on Catalyst. Is just walk us through what did that look like for you? Years and years ago, how did you get introduced to this concept of continuous improvement, Kaizen, and lean, and kind of what did you learn kind of along the way, each one of those stops until you got to SWD. So you kind of like reflect back on that timeline when you first were introduced to a lean business system way of running a company.
Yeah, it was, well, obviously a long time ago now. So, in the late 1990s, I guess, when I first got introduced to it. When I first came off of active duty, and I was working with explosives when I was part of active duty. So I came to a small defense contractor here in Arizona and was doing a lot of DoD type contract work. That there was really no lean. If there was lean, it certainly wasn't aware of what was going on. We had production lines, but it wasn't obvious. That business got involved in automotive components. And it was really when I started to do some work on automotive components and would visit automotive factories, you would hear people talking about these sorts of things that were, their version of the Toyota production system. And so that's when I really started to take an interest. And then when I had my first opportunity to be the P&L leader of a business, I want to say that was 2003. I really started to pay more attention to it because part of that, even though I was in the automotive business, my responsibility was more one of my background being engineering. I was sort of the technology director, did a lot of business development work there as well. But then once you take over P&L and now you're really responsible for manufacturing, you start to think about things a little bit differently. And so we had our factory here in Tempe, Arizona, had a factory in the northern part of England, eventually opened up factories in Mexico as part of all that growth journey. And so that's when we really started to develop. I would simply just understand what people were doing at my customer set, being automotive customers, and sort of apply best practices there as we were thinking about what we needed to do on our own production lines. And really my very first journey with it wasn't so much about standard work. I mean, we had scorecards at the end of a production line, but where I really thought I was doing something that was really innovative was our first use of a Kanban system and managing inventory. And just making sure, I think that as somebody who had a technical background and then taking over P&L leadership, just sort of understanding the importance of managing your inventory and how that really is going to swing the balance sheet. And so, we got to the point where I wouldn't say we were just in time plant, but we were pretty lean. I mean, that was a plant, automotive days. I mean, we would be running, we were probably north of 30 turns. And, we had product coming from all over the world into that factory, especially in Mexico. And, we didn't keep a lot of stock on hand. We were moving through supplies. We were making sure we were tracking how things were used. There was, very little scrap in the factory, but just paying attention to all those great metrics really just set the benchmark for what does good look like. And, we would kind of tout those metrics to our customers, and customers thought as a relatively small supplier in the industry, we were doing a good job. I didn't really have the opportunity to up my game until 2006 when I joined PacSci EMC and Danaher. And boy, that was, you want to just talk about such a great learning experience. You just get to see all
How
these other
long
worlds.
did Danaher own PacSci at that point when you joined? Do you remember?
Yeah, I want to say maybe 8 years, Damon. I think the acquisition was in '98. I could be wrong on that, but maybe 8 years into their journey. And then I came into EMC in 2006 as the general manager of the Chandler facility. And the PacSci EMC was really a conglomeration of different small family-owned energetic businesses that Danaher had acquired through the years. So you had a lot of sort of unique
things
cultures.
like energetic business. So I think it's like really cooler than that. Like you guys make explosives that like the people launch themselves out of a cockpit, on the ejection seat, right? Is that
Right.
more or less what it is?
Yeah, I mean, that's, like I tell people, right? Explosives are all around us and people don't realize it, right? But PacSci makes tens of thousands of different explosive parts, and they some of them, I don't know if they get necessarily used every day, but if you think about automotive parts, pyrotechnic parts get used every day because accidents happen every day, unfortunately. But PacSci is on, basically I would tell people if it flies or it's launched, there's a PacSci part on it. So any type of a mission profile, especially for defense purposes, most of those aircraft, space launch vehicles, they're going to have PacSci parts. And to your example, ejection seats, PacSci, we don't make the ejection seat. PacSci made the pyrotechnic components for the ejection seat. So a lot of the start mechanisms, if a pilot makes a decision to eject, they're pulling an armed fire handle. That's a device produced at our Hollister, California plant. Then that goes into a series of different ignition time delays and things like that. But there's all sorts of pyrotechnic events to get a human being safely out of an aircraft in the blink of an eye. And some of those involve even canopy ejection. So, the canopy itself needs to be removed, or the canopy needs to be split so that the ejection seat, which has rocket motors on the back, that can all lift off. And then it's got rocket motors to make sure it's oriented the right direction, chutes will deploy. You've got reefing line cutters that are going to cut that chute pyrotechnically. I mean, there's pyrotechnics all around us, right? Even when you get on a commercial aircraft, there's pyrotechnics, whether you're talking about the evacuation mechanism for an inflation slide or the engines on the aircraft and the wing of the aircraft. Typically, they're going to have fire extinguishing squibs on them, which are small pyrotechnic devices that open up a burst disc in the halon bottle to release halon just in case there's a fire. But those things, the beauty of those things, and what I always tell people who have listened to me talk before about these things is, people are like, you work in such a cool business. I always tell people the secret part of that business is figuring out a way that those things don't go boom, right? They have to go boom, right? But then kind of think about all the cycles that take place when these devices are being used, and they can't function. They can only function when they get a very specific electric input, and making sure these things can take off and land and everything else. That's kind of the unique part of what PacSci and PacSci's competitors do in the industry.
So you arrived in 2006, and I think Danaher's probably 15, 16 years into DBS. By that point, they've got a model by which they acquire companies, and they have a playbook in terms of how they embed DBS into the company, and that's pretty rigid, and it's spelled out in a timeline. So what did you walk into in 2006? Like, what was the level of lean maturity versus kind of what you were doing on your own, maybe not knowing it was even called lean back then, and you find an organization that has not only lean principles applied, but a full business system across all its companies, and not only just the operations pieces at that point, they're already into growth and commercial and a lot of these things. So what was the state when you arrived?
Yeah, I would say we were relatively immature. That's good, being kind, I guess. Lean is a journey, right? So not like anybody's ever perfect at it, right? We always believe in continuous improvement. But I mean, you didn't really see, I think the absence of standard work is just really one of the things that I always try to take a look at when I'm looking at a business. Where do you see standard work? it can be either on the manufacturing floor, which is some of the easiest places to start. But even if you start to think about, your finance team or your business development or sales departments, what does standard work look like there? So I would say we were very immature in our development. And so, my challenge was in looking at all these other Danaher businesses who were doing it pretty well, just how did it make sense to apply it in that defense mode? And, I had some,
there's such a lack of, I mean, really, your business was so unique. I mean, I got to see every company, and there really wasn't another business that you could even say is even similar to PacSci inside of the portfolio. So did you find it difficult to benchmark, or did you have to get creative and figure out, like, well, how does this principle apply to my business?
it was definitely more get creative, right? Just trying to force fit anything into that defense mindset wasn't the best application. And that was something that was really, I think, driven into me by, some, I was going to say I had some great leaders, right? Larry Culp was one of those, Jim Lico, who is now the retiring CEO of Fortive. I got to work with some great leaders. And I remember Larry himself once telling me, hey, Greg, you've got a tough job. It's like, we kind of tell business leaders that they need to force waste out of their organization. But the very nature of you being a defense contractor, there's probably a lot of waste. And I can remember being a part of some shin events where the sensei would come in and tell us to eliminate this and eliminate that. And I would have to carefully explain, like, while that may not seem necessary to you, I'm getting paid money by my customers to do that step. I can't eliminate it, right? That's the test here is really one of what adds value to a customer. And as part of the bid process, if I have to inspect a part 2 or 3 times, if I'm doing my job as a contractor, I'm bidding that out. But I also shouldn't eliminate that because I'm getting paid because it adds value to the customer. And I think that was part of the journey that you just couldn't necessarily look at a line and say, lean it out without really understanding the customer set in this mission critical industry where it became so important that these devices absolutely have to work because you've got millions of dollars of payloads on a, let's say, on a space launch vehicle, or if you're talking about a missile intercept test, something like that. Obviously, these are millions of dollars, and for $100 part, something go wrong with it, you just can't tolerate it. And so there's a level of precision and a level of inspection there that really does add value to that customer set. If you just blindly strip that out, you're not adding value for the customer, right? And I think this always goes back to the power of voice of the customer and understanding for your particular served market what is important for them. And sometimes it took that, you want to talk about maybe, I don't know how much courage it took, but maybe to go back and maybe it took a little bit of courage to fight with the senseis. I think we've all been there for people who lead practitioners to challenge a sensei during a shin event, but to say, hey, after the fact, this is something that I can't eliminate. I have to do this step. I'll show it to you. I'll explain it to you, but understand telling my people to eliminate this isn't something that we can do.
Yeah.
So,
did you encounter friction in terms of people maybe not understanding your business and the market and the lack of maybe the similar commercial levers that you can pull in your business? Let's say if you missed a month or a quarter, than a business that's going out in a direct sales environment and calling on people and selling a product. Is that at another degree of difficulty as well, or was that just because I'm imagining you've got bids, you win contracts, the cycle is really long. Once you're spec'd in, you're in for a decade.
Yep.
Like if you wanted to go get more sales next month, it's not like I just go land a government client or next week or so. So how did you navigate that environment?
Well, some of that is just, educating upward, right? I mean, I certainly was used to that environment given my background, right? But, sometimes there would be opportunities where, we would always be out there trying to bid on the best contracts we could find. And some of those contracts we would find as being strategic because they would advance some part of a technology set we wanted to demonstrate for the team. But it could be difficult to necessarily, just turn on extra sales for a month. The business was fairly diverse. So it wasn't just the defense business. We had some nice commercial levers that we could sometimes push. sometimes we had more success pushing those than others, right? I wish I could say we made every month. We didn't make every month. I'd love as a lean practitioner to say we made every month, but we didn't. Right? There were definitely months that we missed. And sometimes we had the ability to turn on some extra things to do. But, if something you get down to a lot acceptance test in some of these parts, and if for some reason something fails in a lot acceptance test, then that product isn't going to ship, right? So part of what you're doing and understanding your quality management system, just this principle of driving the root cause and the importance of problem solving and what we want to teach our people to do as great lean practitioners, I think is really trying to say, how can you focus on product failures and make sure that they don't happen? Sure, I missed a month, but the real opportunity is to make sure I don't want to ever fail this product again. So, one of the early metrics we drove in that journey from the 2006 timeframe to kind of the 2013 timeframe while I was there, it's just on the operations side, just really trying to drive around looking at lot acceptance test failures and what we needed to do to drive lot acceptance test failures from happening, I don't even remember the metric, but to happening maybe, 1/10 the rate that they used to have, right? You're never going to eliminate it to zero, but our best years from a financial standpoint were going to be the years where we had the lowest lot acceptance test failures because things happen on time.
This is how you expand margin, right? Because contract price is fixed, and it's like not like you can go out and ask for price. So any form of waste in your business, from lot acceptance failure to even how you do some of those tests that your customer spec'd in as revenue generating, you can do those more efficiently. Then that margin flows back to you and the company. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, one of the unique aspects of defense contracting, they flow back on that contract. Depending on, and some of this is just the mechanisms of of kind of doing government business. But if you come up for renewal on that contract and you're a sole source business, then government gets the right to understand all of your costs as a part of bidding that. So it's kind of this endless cycle, right? So they might understand that you made more profit because you did some things on that particular contract, but when the contract comes up for 5 years in renewal, they're going to take a look, underneath and look at all your cost structure, and that's going to be used to have you hold you to a tighter price next time around. Yeah. So it forces that continuous cycle of, okay, what can I do, right, to consistently drive market leading margins in that industry.
So we had a saying in Danaher, you probably remember this, don't suffer from SQDC dyslexia. So what would happen under intense pressure to meet the month, meet the quarter, sometimes people would get the metrics out of order where they would focus on delivery or cost or something like this, and maybe deprioritize or de-emphasize safety or quality. So I kind of go back to like the nature of your business at PacSci. Do you have those degrees of freedom to like get those things out of order given what you make and who you make and what it does?
Yeah, I'd love to say that I pay attention to safety because I work in the explosives industry, but I never really have thought about it like that. I think safety is important, even as we manufacture foam here. There's always opportunities. It may not necessarily be in manufacturing of foam, but I move around a lot of heavy material. There's a lot of forklift movement, right? If you were to look at our factory here, so understanding kind of how pedestrians interact with forklifts and what can we do there. Safety is a continuous improvement journey in and of its own right. I always think nobody wants to wake up early in the morning and get hurt. And I want to make sure if people are coming to a place that I'm a leader at, that nobody's hurt on the job. And whether you're in the production factory or you're, kind of in carpet land and, if there's reams and boxes of financial records, right? We want to make sure they're not trip hazards. But I think this mentality around safety always has to be first is something that's just, it can never be forgotten in the business. And people pay attention to the leadership tone on that. So it was something that I always made sure of people knew that we took seriously. We were recognized several years while I was at Danaher and Ford as having, the best EHS program across the entire corporation. And I think that's something that it's not something that's just easy to do or because you're in the explosives industry. It's something that there's standard workaround. And people have to understand that safety is everybody's job, right? We say that about everything, right? Sales is everybody's job, but safety is truly everybody's job, just like quality is. And making sure that that's something that you measure and that you talk about. And something that you celebrate when you have wins is a really important part of making sure that, hate safety is something that people understand. It's the cost of doing business. If I can't operate safely, if I have the chance where I'm going to get shut down, I will lose contracts. I will lose sales, right? So yeah, we can focus on delivery, but if for some reason I have something go wrong, if there's equipment damage, if there's personnel damage, if I've got investigations because of, again, in an explosive plant, there's a lot more scrutiny. But, I need to make sure that I need all of my people. I need all my people able-bodied and able to perform the task at hand. I have to ensure that there's a safe working environment to do that. And that's first and foremost.
Yeah, you and I were talking before the webinar, and you talked about respect for people. And to me, I think having a focus on safety and making that how you lead the organization and how you lead others is one of the deepest forms of respect for people, because it's saying no matter the business priority, like safety will always be the first priority. Like I care that you get home safely to your family each and every evening. And I care about your well-being, not only your physical well-being, like your mental well-being. Because if you're not safe and if you're not, physically well and able to do your job, like none of the rest of it matters. Like we're unable to to execute on those things anyway. It seems like such a simple thing, and I think most people would like agree with that in principle. Like I don't know, many people that would like argue that point, at least in 2025. But like, just kind of talk through your ethos around lean and respect for people, and as you thought about this transition into SWD, how are you going to mobilize the people who are working in an environment where like they've never experienced any of this stuff that you did for close to 20 years in Danaher
Right.
around lean? Now, how do you walk into that on that fertile ground, that untilled earth, whatever analogy you want to use, and you got to try to instill all of these disciplines and ways of thinking inside of an organization that's got all of those unique challenges we've already covered, like being family run, being a smaller business, maybe working in a type of manufacturing that isn't naturally thought of as being like widgets or discrete. So what was your thought process going in?
Well, I'd say it's a delicate dance, right? I could come in with an awesome playbook, and I could bring in all these tools. And I think that would have been one of the surest ways to fail here. An organization's ability to do a bunch of different things and deploy all these tools, there just isn't the maturity in most organizations, especially if you're early on in your lean journey, to do all that. I think there's a couple things that you have to hit pretty hard early on. And I think some of those things, if I were to just say maybe three things, right? So leader standard work, right? Early days here at SWD or any job where I'm working, I mean, this concept of leader standard work was something that was really got drilled into me in my Danaher Fortive days, but it's deployable instantly across any business, right? How do you think about an ops review? When do you do your ops reviews? When do you do your staff meetings? When do you make time each month to do your strategic deployment reviews? As leaders, there's certain responsibilities we have, and the organization is going to follow whether or not those things are important if you're sticking to your own leadership cadence. So I know that was relatively new when I came in here, but establishing that cadence around, okay, like as an example, we'll have an all hands meeting later today, but taking the time every month to talk to employees about what's going on is something that becomes really important. So I think every leader's got to decide for either himself or herself, what do they want to do? What does their own cadence look like around that? And then you have to live it and walk it and breathe life into it every month, because it takes dedication to do that. I think the other thing that I would say is pretty important in any business, I'm going to use the term problem solving, and Damon deserves a lot of credit for all the problem solving he worked at. That's when our paths first crossed at Danaher in terms of teaching formal problem solving. But concepts around problem solving, I think, are just so basically applied to any type of great system that has a quality management system. If you're ISO certified or QS 9000 certified or anything like that, as a business, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But problem solving is nothing more than a really good 5 whys process, right? And making sure that you really drive the root cause, and that you're consistently trying to look at if something's not performing against some sort of a standard, how do you drive that variation out so you can reduce it to some form of standard work, and making sure that you've got good tests around testing the countermeasure that was deployed to make sure it's really effective, because that's really sometimes a root cause, will fail itself. And then I just think this whole nature around what does standard work look like for any given department. And I always think it's easiest to deploy standard work when you think about a manufacturing floor. So, the journey typically that I follow is really one around sort of looking at Danaher and Fortive used to call it lean, kind of things on the operations side. Then we would look at the growth journey and what we're doing to sort of grow the top line. And then we would understand what we're doing to manage our talent. And, Danaher learned it sort of in that order. And I know, Damon, you were along for the ride, and a lot of other leaders who may be participating, if you were there in the 05, 04 timeframe, remember all of that. And then now you look at DBS, how it's evolved, FBS, how it's evolved. I mean, it's attention to these three key pillars of lean and growth and talent becomes so important to a business. And I know early on here at SWD, easy for me to focus on the lean side of things. Growth was a bit of a journey because this is a completely new market. So I've spent a lot of time out with my regional sales managers and visiting customers and just trying to understand how do we go to market. But we didn't have a real talent, any sort of talent management process here. So early days, it was important to me to make sure that I found the right talent leader. And so that was something that I knew coming in as a CEO. I needed to find somebody who shared that vision I had for what does great talent management look like. And we're still in the process of building that here, right? What our talent management system looks like. And, this will be our first year where we have a formal performance management process in place where people will understand, hey, these are your goals. Here's how you're being measured to your goals. And here's how you're being compensated for meeting those goals.
I get asked a lot, if you could focus on one thing in an organization, and I've been asked the question many different ways, but more or less it boils down to the same thing. It's like, I know there's a lot I could do, but if I could just focus on one thing, what would it be? And the answer I give people surprises people, because I give them a one-word answer, and I tell them discipline.
Mm.
And if you think about a lot of what you just talked about, leader standard work, discipline, standard work, discipline, problem solving, discipline in that we follow a process. When we are faced with a problem, we don't jump to a solution or jump to an answer. So my question to you around discipline is, if you are an individual who isn't disciplined in your life personally, now if set aside work for a second,
right?
Individual flourish in an environment where discipline is key. Because what I heard you just say about SWD is like you're setting up the monthly operator review, strategy deployment, problem solving, your standard work, like all of these things to me connote discipline. What happens when you have people inside your organization who you're tasking with working in those roles, in those different functional areas to apply standard work and those kinds of things, who may themselves lack discipline in their lives personally? Will they be successful in a disciplined organization? What do you think?
It can be a challenge, right? I mean, but I think, again, I think that, being respectful to people, I think this is where having a crucial conversation really helps, right? If for some reason, regardless of whether somebody is personally disciplined to do something or not disciplined, right? I mean, I never really look at it that way because everybody's measure of discipline is different.
You have discipline beat in your head.
Yeah, I mean, right. So, I know I can't use the litmus test I have for myself or everybody else, right? So, I always remind myself of that. But, I always remember, Jim Lico used to talk at different company events, and Jim would always say, what's the one lesson? Kind of your question. Jim would always say, I'm going to give you the gift of high expectations. And, I'll shamelessly steal Jim's quote here, but that gift of high expectations is ones that as leaders, that's how we make our people grow. So if I'm coming into this organization and, we have a candid conversation around what the expectation set is, and if somebody can't meet those expectations, then we have to have a different conversation, right? About what some sort of performance improvement plan looks like. But I'm never going to walk in and just say, hey, listen, you're not showing me any discipline, so hit the road. I'm going to have that conversation more around, these are the sorts of standards that I want to see. These are the expectations of what it's going to look like. And some of this is a continuous improvement journey and just trying to understand as the person that you're working with of the right mindset that they can change. Because more often than not, people that I've found who won't be successful in organizations I led are people who basically are telling me, hey man, I'm not going to change. You just got to get used to it. That's pretty much a sign that you're going to be exiting my organization if I'm expecting you to change and you're not willing to make the change. Or if you're willing to make the change, that's something that, okay, I'm going to invest my time. I'm going to invest my leadership energy in this because I want to work with you because my job is to help you be successful. And because when you're successful, in turn, I can be successful as a business leader.
Yeah, I think high expectations, in a sense, is almost like a form of Kanban, and it creates pull in the organization towards problem solving. You talked
It
about
does.
the government like saying, okay, let's look at your cost structure, and now we know what you are, and here's where the new target is, and then that triggers the whole cycle of PDCA. I think high expectations does the same thing. It's like if every metric is green, Sensei would say, no problem, big problem, right? So
Right.
I think neither, it's like as the expectation is set for the leader, so goes the organization. So you almost have to force yourself individually to set a higher expectation than you normally would, knowing that the organization will fall short of the entire challenge, but probably meet a far greater result than had they not had a higher expectation to begin with.
Right.
I don't want to just like have everybody on this call thinking, oh, the secret is just set a high target and that's all it takes, because it's more than that. To me, that's weak leadership by just setting a high target and then supporting people
Right.
achievement of that target by equipping them with the tools and resources and time that they need to go after the problem in a consistent way. So
yeah, I think some of this too is I'm just thinking about our own journey here, right? So, again, just sort of borrowing or stealing, whatever you want to say, but best practices around a bowling chart and what does that look like, and having the operations review or strategic deployment review where you create the accountability moment for the team to come together and talk about a color, right? So kind of teaching the team here, like, it's easy if you're just coming together for a review and think, oh my God, red is bad and I need to be green on everything.
in that room, Greg, what was the first review like where you were using a lot of these tools like the KPI bowler, the action plan, problem solving? Just tell us the dirty behind the scenes.
I mean, ugly, I guess is one way to say it. But again, it takes coaching, right? So I sat in the first couple ops reviews that we had here and kind of knew first one, like, oh wow, okay, I got to do some teaching here. And then I sat through another one, and then we were getting, kind of had the team aside and said, listen, we're not going to do this anymore, right? Because we were talking about hundreds of metrics, right? And so I don't mind going through a deck where we're doing an L2 level review, and if we need to go through dozens of metrics, okay, we'll go through dozens of metrics. It's a bit of the walk, right? But when we're at the what I'll call the L1 review, I mean, we've got KPIs that it's 5 to 8, right? Like this whole thing around the critical review. Those are the things that we need to talk about, and understanding that red isn't always red and green isn't always green. I mean, and some of it is in the eye of the beholder, right? It's based on trends. It's based on how are we performing against other things that are happening, let's say, in the market, or what might be challenging the plant. But it's not as simple as just saying red is bad and green is good. I mean, I had a teaching moment this last cycle we went through where it's like, hey, listen, generally speaking, when we're at KPIs, my expectation is that these things need to be green. So when you're not green for a KPI, this is sort of the measurement of standard work. But when we come to the SD review, if you're giving me a bunch of greens, it's sort of a sign that maybe we're really not green because these things are important. We don't know how to do these things yet. So are we really green? Are we measuring the right thing? Because chances are we're not measuring the right thing in an SD review. We really need to be looking at, hey, we're developing a new process. We're teaching ourselves we're developing new muscle memory. We don't know how to do this specific training thing. So we're going to be red. And so I think.
Tell me if you heard these things. Filtering the truth. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Sandbagging.
Yep. Yep.
Greens I would call watermelon greens, where you're green but you're really red on the inside.
I like that one. I haven't heard that one.
So there's a lot of psychological factors here, which are cultural, which I kind of all go back to the point of people don't want to look like a failure or look like they're losing. And you as a leader have to create the condition inside the company where it's okay as long as we're working towards that, not saying we're working towards it, but actually working towards something through our activity.
It
Um,
goes, yeah, I think, Damon, it goes to the behavior set that you witness, right? I'm not just looking for the outcome. I mean, yes, the outcomes are important. But I care as a business about how you achieve those outcomes. So it's not so much about coming to the review and you're green or you're red, but let's let's talk about what are you doing, right? And so if you're green, I want to talk a lot about the action plan. I want to really understand what are you doing? Did you just am I just I got lucky and I'm green? If I got lucky and I'm green, I really don't care. I mean, sure, I might be happy for the month, but it's really not setting the expectation set around the continuous improvement mindset that we're really asking the deeper questions. And what have we learned? And what are we going to do differently from that thing that we've learned?
so talk to us about early when, I guess, 18 months. So what have been some of the key wins in your mind of what you've been able to accomplish at SWD, 18 months lean journey?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot to like so far. Not unlike the PacSci experience, right? So I talked about LAT failures and reduction of LAT failures, but a key metric around here is just sort of looking at customer complaints, right? And so, if we were to chart the metric on customer complaints from point A to point B, I mean, those are dramatically reduced from where we were. That that's making sure that we're counting things the same way, and basically any customer concern is something that comes up on the register, and making sure we have good agreement around that. And I'm blanking it, and there's great transparency. We work these things on a cross departmental basis, which didn't necessarily exist here. But I mean, a lot of it goes to just what do we need to do to minimize sources of variation in the production plant, and really trying to empower the team that when something seems different, you have the authority to stop the line. So early days here, I can remember, well, two particular, I'll try to make the story short here, but just one first week on the job, something got screwed up and production manager came to me and said, hey, this mistake was made. This operator made a mistake. I'm ready to fire the person. Just need you to approve it. And we had the discussion around nobody's getting fired today. We need to understand what can we learn about why a mistake was made. Right. And then the other thing was, and maybe it was, who knows, the second or third week, somebody noticed that something that we made smelled differently than other lots, and we didn't ship it. Right. And so just making that leadership decision, but getting back to this whole SQDIP dyslexia. All right, when I don't ship something, it's a big deal in this industry. But it's a big deal in any industry. But here it's basically, we gotta eat what we kill, basically. It's basically we take an order and we're shipping within a day. So if I'm not sending something, it's a big deal. But making sure that, hey, it smells different, something's different. It just doesn't smell different because it's the same as everything else. We need to understand, why is it different? Is it okay? Right. So taking the time to stand down and pushing the team and saying, well, listen, we need to ship this, but we're not shipping it until we get the root cause. That sends a really good message to the team that, hey man, things are different now. Right. We're empowered, but we're also going to be held to a higher standard. Like, we got to go figure out why. All hands on deck.
Other key wins?
Another one that I like to look at is just when we've had lost customers. So the ability to take customers who maybe made a decision in their buying journey to not purchase from SWD a little bit more. And now we've got people who are coming back and saying, really love your product. We've got a couple new product launches during my time here. I think those products have had some really good success. What I've found interesting about that is we've had some opportunities through a buying consortium that we're a part of, where sure, I've got a great sales team on the ground. That sales team is doing their work and they're selling the product. I go on sales calls as well. And one of the things I would tell you as a CEO, I don't sell the product. I sell the business. And one of the messages that I sell about the business is this very journey that we're talking about. People want to hear what we're doing that's different. People want to understand what we're doing to empower people. People want to understand why production variation is something that we want to stamp out. People want to get that messaging around quality. So baking that into our messaging, right? I always tell my sales team when I'm out on the road with them, hey, listen, you sell the product, you know all the R values, you know all the board feet per pound and everything else, right? But I'm talking about the journey. I want to talk about the new things at SWD. And that's what customers will say, hey, listen, it's a new day. I want to know more. Yeah. Because it's a different message. And I find that is a good way to open up doors.
And doesn't it deepen the partnership too with your customers in that they don't view SWD as a spaceless corporation? It's, you know, it's a group of people that are mobilized towards a common objective, and there's a journey, and it's really a story brand. And I think a lot of companies miss that opportunity because maybe they view their product or service as being maybe like, you know, not something worth creating a story about because of the nature of it is. And I would say, you know what, you absolutely can do that. And one of the examples that I use is like this product called Dude Wipes. If you've ever seen this guy.
And yeah, I have.
He sells much, and he's made a story brand out of something that you wouldn't like think about normally. So it's proof that you can take a commodity or a quote unquote boring product and put it front of mind in people's minds when making a choice.
Yeah, and I think, you know, kind of back to one of the earlier questions around a family-owned business. I mean, I think it's so important in our journey, and even Danaher did this in its playbook, right? There are some storied businesses that have long family lineage that were acquired by Danaher, and they kept those names of those businesses because there's that brand name recognition in the family name. That's very much the case at SWD. We're proud that we're a family-owned business. We're proud that we're here in America. You know, we'll fly that patriotic flag sometimes, right? And making sure that we're touting all those things. But at the same time, while we're small, right? I want to make sure that smallness is equated to nimbleness, but there's a process, right? So what are you going to get from SWD that you don't get from my competitors? Is you're going to get people who think like the big corporations, and that's why they're big, because man, they do things really well, right? But if we can learn from those big corporations and we can do those things they do really well in a small family-owned business where we can provide really great responsiveness, if for some reason you need us in the field or you need something from an architectural document standpoint, right? We want to make sure that we're extremely responsive. We want to make sure that we're more nimble, but that we have our practices are just as good as, if not better than, the biggest guys out there in the industry. And so being able to straddle that sort of land between where the small guys are and then where the big guys play is the journey that we're under here at this business.
Great story. I look forward to hearing more of it. Are you ready to take some questions?
I am.
Okay, so question here. How embedded and or functional was lean in the culture, the day-to-day practice, and the buy-in at all levels, et cetera, into SWD when you joined SWD?
Not at all. I mean, my assessment would be wasn't really a lean thinking around that. I think there was some evidence based on some posters I saw of some attempts at it, but in terms of probing the culture around was it really being done, I would say very, very, very limited when I first came on board here.
This question is about gaining CEO influence. How should I work with my CEO who doesn't have Greg's background in lean to convince them to go on to a lean journey? What advice would you give me to talk with my leader, my CEO?
You know, I would always tell people, I love this concept. We didn't talk a lot about in the past hour, but I'm sure Damon has some other stories about it. Maybe some of my peers who have been on here have talked about the power of experimentation, but man, there's nothing like running an experiment, right? I mean, make people a believer. Figure out, tell your CEO, hey, I'm calling this thing lean, and I'm going to tell you how I'm going to go enact this. And here's my experiment. And here's what I want to do. And here's where I'm going to do it, right? And it's limited, but show the results. And then if you can show the results in one area, and then you can come up with a way to scale that, most people are going to be a believer because people are paying attention to the bottom line. And so, I try to encourage the same things here. I don't need to boil the ocean. I mean, there's a lot of things we could do, but I love this idea of starting small, because the sooner we start something, the sooner we started something. We're not talking about it, right? We're all tired of being in meetings where all we do is talk. I think this bias for action becomes such an important part of how we need to think about leading businesses. So I love ideas around starting small. Pick one cell, pick one part, depending on the operation, right? But pick just one thing that you want to go do and show what winning looks like, and then go scale that.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. I think a lot of people view it as a zero-sum game where if I'm not doing the whole thing all at once and everywhere and all functions, then why bother?
Right.
The reality is, it's like Danaher didn't start that way.
Absolutely not.
The way that you're talking.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much power. And again, I would say this idea around experimentation at Danaher, if I remember the journey, was really around the development of growth tools. But the same thing's true on a production floor, right? I mean, start small. But I love that idea around just trial something, right? If we're trying a new foam, right? I mean, I don't need to go launch a new foam. I'd almost rather not.
Yeah.
I'd rather go try something in a small batch where I've committed just limited resources to it, and I'm going to go try it with the trusted customer where I'm like, hey, I want you to spray this stuff, and I want you to give me some honest feedback. How's it work? I'm looking for this certain environmental condition. I want to go see how this works, right? And I'll learn from that. But the sooner I can do that, the better, because otherwise you get yourself, it's the power of going to Gemba. Sitting around a conference room, you're not going to learn anything if you're sitting around talking about it. Go out into the real place, experiment with it, and go make it happen.
One of the comments from the participants listening here, he quotes Jim Collins in his book. He talks about shooting bullets, then cannonballs. Like, save your mission for when you're really locked in and you know exactly what you need to do, but you shot a lot of bullets to get to the cannonball phase. So
absolutely, it gives you that conviction, right? Gives you that conviction to go all in, right? Because I know I've seen this work. Right, it's not untested. It's not just a hypothesis. It's not just conference room work. It's Gemba. Gemba evidence is everything.
This last question here: changing leadership behavior is critical to lean transformation. How have you handled this with your leaders in terms of changing their behaviors? So I imagine with SWD and kind of a lot of leaders you had in your career, there's been some behaviors, positive and negative, that you've had to change in order for them to move along with the lean journey.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I thought about is just sort of these critical lessons learned. I don't remember the exact year, but I remember one time I was at a review, and I was sort of touting. We had a lot of successful years at PacSci EMC, and one of the things that I was touting was that we had very low turnover in my leadership team. And I got asked this critical question: well, is that a good thing? And you start to think about it, and you're like, am I challenging enough, right? As a leader, am I challenging enough? And it starts to make you think about not trying to turn the team over, but am I setting those expectations high enough? Yeah, we're throwing up great numbers, but what are we really doing to lift the expectations so that we're challenging and developing a leadership team to think differently and to think stretch objectives? I thought there was a really good lesson set in there where sometimes you're like, hey, I've got this great retention number of my senior leadership team, but am I growing them enough? Really challenging them where, wow, I might have to ask some critical questions.
Yeah, that's. I think a lot of people, they want to be right, they want to be done, they want to achieve the target, they don't want questions, they don't want to hire, right. They don't want people to ask why aren't we hitting, because it forces calories that they don't want to expend. And I think part of it too is going back to the psychology of bread. They don't want to look bad. Right. So I think if you as a leader demonstrate the behavior, which it's okay to ask those questions. Somebody asked me the question of like, hey, maybe you're not turning over your company enough. And rather than defend that, I reflected on that and thought through like, well, maybe I'm not setting the expectation high enough. So I think it's kind of at the macro level, like the behavior that you're changing is in modeling yourself as a leader, Greg, the behavior you want in others. Therefore,
that's right.
People will see it, they'll lead by your example. You gave another one where you talked about the guy who came to you and said, I need to fire so-and-so. I'm sure he took that lesson back with him and said, well, if I made a mistake, Greg's probably not going to fire me now. He's going to give me a second chance. So, and maybe you even have that conversation with them, like, would you want me to fire you if you had made a mistake?
Right.
Digging into what happened and, you know, that kind of thing. So, that's a great example. So it was a fast hour, Greg. You're going to have to do this again when you're another year and a half into the journey and more wins stacked up at SWD. But I want to thank you for your time and your contribution today. So before we bid farewell to Greg, I encourage everybody to take a moment to reflect on the valuable insights and practical advice that he shared with us today and how you can apply these lessons more importantly in your organization and your lean journey. If you have any further questions or would like to explore the possibilities of initiating or enhancing or perhaps restarting your own lean transformation, don't hesitate to reach out to us here at Lean Focus. We're here to support you every step of the way. Thank you again, Greg. Thank you for your service. It's great to have people like you in the world and look forward to learning more on your journey. Thanks all.
Thanks, Damon. Yep. Thank you.
The rest of your week. Bye now.